They didn't close a deal, and so they have been penalised very heavily for having large trade surpluses with the United States.
We'll talk about the implications in a moment, but a country like Switzerland, and the president of Switzerland went to Washington to try to sort out the last minute. It's very significant that Switzerland is quite a big player in the international financial scene.
Yeah, I think there may well be special circumstances here. The Swiss have a huge trade surplus in relative terms with the United States, and it's surged 56% since the last tariff level was set. So that's why I think they went from 31 to 39. The other thing is the Swiss have very little offer in terms of being able to lower tariffs on import taxes because they've already got rid of most of them in Europe. Agriculture they protect very heavily. Liberalising that is political top thing for the government. And so they're left then with very few options of whether perhaps the most important, which is offering to invest a lot or buy a lot from the United States. Buying a lot is difficult to do, but this is Swiss people might challenge this in a referendum. And so investing a lot was the only offer on the table. They offered 150 billion in investments control in April, and this was just not enough. The trip to Washington, I doubt, will be regarded as the high point in Swiss diplomacy in the 21st century. It's rushed. It seems that critical meetings didn't happen, and I think there will be recriminations when the president returns.
So, Simon, what about the implications? Because I've seen some interesting writing about this. People saying, well, it's quite surprising that the financial system hasn't really taken fright at all this, that they don't seem to be that worried almost about this really quite radical change in the global trade architecture.
It is a radical change, and I think we're onto something here. You may remember back in April when President Trump announced this massive increases in tariffs across the board for many countries. Within a week, he had to suspend them because the financial markets went haywire and they took fright. This time around, he's been a hell of a lot more artful. They have dribbled out announcements on key trading partners, including trade deals. So this has given a flow of good news to the financial markets. Critically, before he announced his last set of tariff increases for the 66 countries I talked about earlier, he also announced just before that he had found a way to roll over the tariffs for Mexico and suspend those for another 90 days. So he gave the market a good news story before a bad news story. And this has been very artfully managed. And they've been keeping one card on their sleeve as well, which is that on the 12th of August, they have to decide whether to roll over and extend the course of the tariff increases in China. And I think they've deliberately not announced that, just in case the financial markets went haywire, and then there's another good news story.
But media management is one concern. Actually, the effect of this is going to be very interesting. Is it going to change things that benefit the US economy?
One thing I think you'd be very hard pressed to find any professional economist who thinks that tariffs are going to provide US manufacturing or bring jobs back. Manufacturing is now just very different from what they were when President Trump was growing in the 60s. And it was much more machines and robots than humans these days. So that part of the American establishment is not coming back. What is going to change is that the US is marginalizing itself in terms of the world trading system, and this will result in considerably reduced imports into the United States. That in turn is already pushing up the prices of imported goods compared to domestically produced goods. So in the near term, I think you will begin to see inflation pressures go up now that these tariffs have been confirmed, and then I think we will see also companies further postponing investment, as we saw in the Q2 GDP figures. So this will be a drag on US growth, and this creates a situation of very slow growth, if not recession, and inflation. That's called stagflation, and no one wants to be a president during the era of stagflation. Unfortunately, Donald Trump probably will be as he fights the midterm elections, and that might well provide the corrective which makes him change policy.
Simon, speaking to me earlier, Fabian, it's a really interesting analysis of what's going to happen, because I think you have been surprised that the markets haven't been spooked as we thought they would be. Do you have the same view that this in the end is not going to help the United States?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think it's a really radical move by Trump, and I think he's gaining more enemies rather than friends around the world. It does go to analyze. Can only get 1% point low, which is explained rivalry between each other, between Milei and Trump, but I think it's a radical change in trade around the world. As the research was explaining to the board, but I think it's bringing so many changes that we'll see the repercussions in months to come or even during the year. And many countries will be affected or are being affected by this.
Yeah, and Neymar, do you agree? Do you think this is going to be negative? I mean, what are the people around you in California?
Well, some people are optimistic, while others not so much. But a lot of people think that, in the long term, there may be some geopolitical uncertainty regarding, other countries. So this may not just be Trump-specific tariffs, in the sense that, the U.S. may continue some of those after the Trump presidency as well. So let's see how it goes. But there are, of course, a lot of people are saying that there should be a just and fair global trading order, which doesn't seem to be what's happening with the tariffs, especially in the light of the trade war with India and Brazil.
Well, let me ask you about India, because obviously in your normal area where you work, you're quite near to India, and Pakistan and India have interesting relations a lot of the time, but India's got to get really bad. Even with the 25% initial tariff that was announced, a lot of people thought that India would be able to weather that storm. And of course, negotiations are still going on. But what was announced, additional 25% tariffs, when they were announced, a lot of people were surprised. This is something. There was also, Pakistan got 19% tariffs, right? So our first issue when it was announced was that we really should be worse off than our competitors, which fortunately we weren't. Leading it said that there's indeed a good deal given that a higher tariff could have hit us. So Pakistan getting a deal on par with our peers was absolutely an advantage. But it depends on how we can capitalize on the high tariffs on India. So there's now that with the additional 25%, there's a lot of talk whether we can capitalize on it because the Indian industry is way more competitive than ours. And if you want to capture that market change, not just us, it's other players in the Southeast Asian region as well, who will be trying to capture that market. So we would have to work on enhancing our competitiveness. Yeah, and Fermin, you mentioned about how Argentina's got this 10%, which is certainly at the bottom line. It matches what the UK is getting at, right? But the rest of the region are getting, hit quite badly. Certainly, obviously, Brazil is.
Definitely, you're quite right. Brazil got a big blow with this announcement, and including many key sectors of its export to the US. We were hit with the coffee makers, but many other sectors are being hit. They are estimating 35% of the exports will be affected by this. There's quite a lot of competition about that, mainly because of other countries that may not be exporting that much to the US now, and they might be willing to do so after the news of Brazil, because it's a window into them.
So what, you mean Colombia or I suppose Peru?
Colombia, Argentina, Uruguay, quite a long list to be honest, because many countries such as Argentina also got the 10%. So they are actually in a better position now to export to the US compared to Brazil. So it's kind of opening up another market.
And of course we know there is a question mark about Mexico. Mexico and Canada having been long the subjects of kickings from Donald Trump. At the moment, Mexico at least still seems to be unclear what's going to happen.
Yeah, you're really right. The bargaining power has been quite interesting. They were able to hold tariffs for a while as a part of a difficult conversation between Sheinbaum and Trump over the phone. They spoke a few times already, and they pushed the tariff for 90 days now. And I think it shows quite a significant strength from the Mexican president now, which is not the case from Brazil. The political differences between Trump and Lula explain the tariffs. It's mainly a retaliation by the decision of the judiciary in Brazil to incarcerate Bolsonaro.
Yeah, it seemed more political and economic, certainly in that area.
Yeah, it actually is. It actually is.
Well, let's talk about something else that actually is in part of this, because we've said that we don't really know necessarily whether the tariffs are going to stick around, what's going to happen, because Donald Trump has been very changeable. And he's been talking, even just the last few days, about a whole other set of tariffs that will be coming in on one very specific item. Talking about chips or semiconductors. Have a listen to what he has to say.
I think they had a tariff of approximately 100% for chips and semiconductors. But if you're building in the United States of America, there's no charge, even though you're building and you're not producing yet in terms of the big numbers of jobs and all of the things that you're building. If you're building, there will be no charge.
That was Donald Trump speaking just a couple of hours ago, and there's no timeline on this. It's come out of nowhere. I suppose countries like South Korea, Taiwan are going to be affected, China itself perhaps. It's really hard to see. Mena, what did you make of this? It's a rather extraordinary thing to say, and it seems almost off the cuff.
Well, the thing is that, chip stocks response and after hours was positive across the board. So it seems like, because he announced that if you build in the US or even smaller companies, then he announced a list of names of the companies they're going to sell here also, that, they're investing in the US. So at the moment, that not much has changed as far as the stocks response is concerned.
Yeah, so there's a kind of, well, perhaps they're just waiting to see what it really means. And Fabian, and the interesting thing is, this reflects on what is absolutely at the core of the modern economy, which is microchips and semiconductors. They are absolutely where the US and other countries need to be part of the modern economy.
Yeah, you're very right, and it's a question of the actual capacity of the US to do domestic production of technology, in this case microchips, but we can also think it broader and think of the critical minerals, the lithium, copper, all the essential parts of the global energy transition that are coming in, and a lot of countries need them, and the US needs actually much more because of its scale. It's a tricky question. Can they actually boost domestic production? Can they compete on the global market? I think it's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, and interestingly, Lula, the president of Brazil, has been talking about getting together other groups of countries. He was talking about the BRICS group, of course, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Yeah, and talking about bringing them together to act as a kind of a group of, managing their resources, perhaps even trying to make sure that the resources they have are not exported raw and that kind of thing. I mean, do you think there's going to be that kind of regional solidarity, or solidarity at a slightly lower level of power to try and get some power out of it?
Well, I would like to say yes, but I don't think that's very realistic. I mean, I've seen attempts like that in the past as well. Lula is probably a really strong role, and his current time on the seal as president has shown him become a global leader on many levels. But reaching something like that, I think that's going to be very, very tricky. It will need alignment that will be difficult, and I've seen discussions like that in Latin America in the past as well, trying to make more regional integration in terms of lithium and other minerals as well, and it really hasn't led to anything in the past. Hopefully it will be different because it will give them more negotiating power, but it's tricky to actually reach it.
Yeah, and Mema, when these big countries fall out, in this case we're talking about China and the US to some extent in terms of the rivalry for originating semiconductors and trying to get them into your economy. It's the smaller countries that seem to get forgotten or left out. I mean, obviously Pakistan has a very long-standing alliance with China. So how does this all work for Pakistan?
Well, Roger, first of all, I would like to talk about BRICS. I mean, you just brought it up.
Yeah.
The thing is that, I actually think that this entire thing with Brazil, India, even Russia, yes, of course, there are political connotations when it comes to Brazil, and of course, the Ukraine-Russia war is there. So there's that, but it's also targeting BRICS countries in a way, if you look at the tariffs. And when it comes to India, because a lot of people are surprised by the penalty tariff on India, So they're asking whether it is just because of BRICS, is it Additionally, because of Brexit, is India being targeted because of that, as well as other factors? Of course, some can be political, some can be geostrategic. As far as China and and chips and all of this is concerned, I think that there's this realization within the big tech. I'm in California, in the Silicon Valley, I'm in the Bay Area. So people basically think that there are geopolitical risks are also there, but there's this realization that they want to be less reliant. Want to have less reliance on the international supply chain.
Of course, as far as they can. But it's you're caught in the middle of all this. This is half the problem. Anyway, we're going to talk a bit more about Apple when we come back, because Apple is determined to at least appear to be investing big time in the US. Stay with us.
We'll be back with Business Matters shortly. In 60 minutes, the documentary investigates the record number of New Zealanders leaving the country.
So at one point, recently, for a 12-month period, there were 80,000 New Zealand citizens that left to live in another country.
At 2 GMT, don't miss Outlook.
12-year-old Luca Kajanitz came home from a party with a sore throat. The infection spread, and within weeks he'd lost his hands and lower legs to sepsis. He's recently become one of the very few to have had a double hand transplant.
And then at 3:30 GMT, the food chain unwraps which foods could reduce your risk of dementia.
Probably one of the most well-studied patterns in relationship to cardiovascular health, mortality, and ultimately dementia was a Mediterranean diet.
All that and more coming up from the BBC World Service.
You're listening to Business Matters from the BBC World Service with me, Roger Geary. Coming up in the next half hour, we're live with a roundup of news and business headlines from across the world. A comment from our guest, Mehmet Safraz, confirming coup. We're going to be looking at Apple's plans for investment in the US, a summer of stink in American cities, and the world's most famous investor, the 95-year-old sage of Omaha. We're coming up after the news.
BBC News. Donald Trump says there's a good chance he'll meet Russia's President Putin soon to discuss a ceasefire in Ukraine. Earlier on Wednesday, Mr. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff had what was described as a highly productive meeting with Mr. Putin in Moscow. The US President has also announced his intention to impose a 100% tariff on chips and semiconductors produced abroad, without giving a timeline. It's said he might impose further tariffs on China, similar to the 25% duties imposed on India on Wednesday for purchasing Russian oil. The US Army sergeant has been detained after he opened fire at the Fort Stewart Army base in Georgia. 5 other soldiers were wounded. State TV in Sudan says the Air Force has destroyed an Emirati aircraft Canadian mercenaries as it landed in an area of Darfur controlled by the RSF paramilitary force. Nicaragua has passed a new law declaring all land within 15 kilometers of its borders state property. Critics feel the move will let President Ortega's government seize ounce of farmland and could open the door to more mining. A woman whose brother died in the Air India crash in June says her family suffered added trauma when they were given a dead body. Fingaon Greenlaw was among the 270 people who died in the Boeing 787 crash in Ahmedabad shortly after taking off for London. Scientists in Canada have discovered the nature of the mysterious disease that has killed millions of starfish along the Pacific coast of North America over the past decade. They say it's caused by bacteria that also infect shellfish. BBC News.
Welcome back to Business Matters with me, Roger Geary, and my guest today, Mehmet Safraz and Fumi. Now, the White House says Apple has promised an additional $100 billion of investment in the United States. The tech giant has already pledged to invest $500 billion over the next 4 years. It comes after President Trump singled out Apple by name earlier this year, threatening to raise
spur even more production right here in America for critical components used in Apple products all around the world. And we're thrilled to announce that we've already signed new agreements with 10 companies across America to do just that.
Cook. Well, I spoke to our US tech correspondent, Lily Jamali, and I asked her whether this is the huge change that Donald Trump claims while showcasing that Apple is prioritizing the US over China or India.
Certainly, Apple is hoping it will come off as significant in the eyes of one person, and that is U.S. President Donald Trump. You know, I was thinking about the vision that Trump had laid out a couple months ago, and his Commerce Secretary as well. American workers screwing iPhones together in places like Duluth, Minnesota, or Omaha, Nebraska. I don't think that's what we're looking at here, because that is just very expensive. It could, triple or even quadruple the cost of an iPhone, for example. But I do think what we're seeing here is an attempt to please this president, going from a $500 billion commitment that has now been expanded to $600 billion. And one of the specifics, Tim Cook dressed up in his finest suit today, talking about how every single new iPhone and Apple Watch will contain covered glass made in the state of Kentucky. So there you have. It sounds like a concession. So at least some components, key components in that case, will be made here in America.
But the glass you're talking about, I mean, it's a good, it's a thing that obviously Americans want and will help. But I mean, this is extraordinary amounts of money that we're talking about. That must be wider than that. It must be something pretty big actually going to be built.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the numbers, we're being bombarded by numbers. Let's be very open about that. Just in the last half hour, Tim Cook tweeted it out, a barrage of data, 450,000 jobs with suppliers and partners to be created. Noted manufacturing will be taking place at 79 factories across the country. Fundamentally, we have to understand that some of these investments were already in the works. So projects in Texas, for example, had been announced even before the announcement that we did referenced a moment ago in February. We're also talking about things that a lot of these tech companies are doing. Data centers, growing capacity for AI in places like Nevada and Arizona. So I think this is a pretty political moment in Silicon Valley, and here you have yet another tech CEO standing side by side with Donald Trump, trying to make sure he stays on the right side of this precedent.
But you said that, he doesn't look like we're going to see iPhone being assembled in Tennessee or Wyoming or wherever it may be. But does that mean there's going to be a bit of an end to Apple and other companies like big investment in, let's say, India in the future, of where you would actually put places to manufacture stuff? Are they going to be under pressure to move almost everything to the US?
I don't think so. I think if we look at the discussions around tariffs these last couple of months and some of the things Tim Cook has said on the earnings calls these last couple of quarters, it's pretty clear. Remember, Trump wanted everything to be produced in the U.S. Instead, what Apple did was they said, okay, iPhones bound for the U.S. will now be made not in China, but in India. And there you see India now being a target of Donald Trump with his tariff war. We see other products like AirPods and MacBooks and so on being moved from China to Vietnam, if those products, again, are bound for the U.S. But the bulk of this stuff is still being made in China. Apple products sent around the world. That is still the hub.
Lily Jamali speaking to me earlier. Mabel, do you think this is really a standoff with China? Is that what it's all about? Just trying to make sure that China doesn't get the kind of investment that Donald Trump doesn't want it to have, as well as bringing it all home as much as possible to the US?
Well, Roger, I think it's a mix of a few things. First of all, I think big companies have been leveraging with something office for the next 4 years, maybe for 4 years, that does not very much time. The ecosystem of companies can easily be shifted in 4 years if consumer sentiment or habits can change. So no company that can invest, that can afford to invest in the US will be willing to take a risk. Then there's also this realization, as I said earlier, that it may not be just a short-term thing for
awful lot in boosting the tech industry if it needed boosting.
I was talking to some people over here because I am in the Bay Area, so yes, I am part of the Silicon Valley as well. And they basically said that, with the surprising tariffs on India, of course, there's still time to finalize them. But, there's that risk as well for tech companies like Apple and other companies. And, of course, the geopolitical risk related to China. So, yes, it will be good, but however, it's still up in the air, as your other guest was saying earlier, that, we don't know whether, all of that will come or not. But Trump said that he will keep an eye on the investment and he will see how much money is being invested or not. But of course, it will not happen overnight. It will take a long time. A lot of these companies are diversifying, their product, how they manufacture.
Yeah. I mean, an awful lot of work is actually done by robots anyway, not the vast number of people that have to be employed in it necessarily. And Fermin, what's your take on this? Do you see this as a move by Apple effectively to try to curry favour with where the power is, which is right now in Washington?
Yeah, I think the reasoning of Apple's investment is purely political. It's responding to Trump's agenda since day one, since he took office. It was clearly evident that he was leaning towards boosting domestic production in the US, but I think we are still really far off from actually seeing an iPhone or any Apple product actually fully made in the US. I think we are going to see parts of them definitely built there, but it's going to be very tricky to see the whole thing there. I mean, the technology, the scale, the number of workers they will require, I don't think we will be able ever to see that. I think it's something really far off at the moment.
So, Fermin, something that has always surprised me in a way, if you think of, okay, you take on board that labour is relatively cheap in China and in countries around there, potentially, which is why they build these things there. But if you take an area like your neck of the woods, Latin America, where there are highly educated people can build these things, who can work on this stuff, and yet none of the spend from big tech seems to be there. We don't see big assembly plants in Chile or in Peru or Bolivia. It just isn't happening, or Argentina.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, all the big companies think of anything on the list is really concentrated in this part of the world. Any country that you take a look has a massive amount of resources, from copper to lithium to nickel. Everything is here, but it's purely focused on extraction. There's no sort of added value being done here, and it's something that most politicians in the region have been pushing for. We haven't seen any sort of progress, and I think it's really hard to actually get there because most of the refining is really focused on China, and actually shifting that, I don't even think it's feasible because you will need massive amounts of investment. I think one area that we could see change would be artificial intelligence and data centers. There are some expectations that actually coming into the region and lots of investment on that. As you may know, Latin America has a really significant scale of renewable power. So we may see, for example, data centers that
wages, healthcare. Public services have not been budgeting on wages. The impact in the communities is devastating. I walk through my neighborhood and there's just trash all over the place. I'm from the city of Malden.
How long are you guys prepared to stay out here?
Well, we're going to be prepared for as long as it takes. I'd rather die on my feet than bring up my knees.
If the state public services can the same ways, if we can offer certain while several communities across America receive contracts. Foster Mayor Greg Barca says that they've been left holding the proverbial garbage man.
Negotiation. Yeah, well, there are many levels to trash is one of the biggest problems in cities in the world. Most cities, including Buenos Aires, spend most of its money on disinfectant to deal with trash. Not everyone actually knows what to do with trash. We don't recycle as much as we do. We consume more than we do. There's a lot of food waste still going around. In many cases, they are powerful unions as well. Have a lot of negotiating power, and they can really stop the city if they interrupt the trash cycle. In Argentina, we get the introduction of this because there are different situations in the city, but we get the trash picked out every day, which is a little bit unusual because in other parts of the world they don't get the trash picked up every day. And we have a special place for recycling, but in many cases it just goes to the same place. Other cities in the country work differently, but we still have a lot of landfills that are not managing waste very well, and there's a lot of moving trash inappropriately and really low rates of recycling. I think trash, to be honest, is one of the biggest issues around the world for any major city.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's. I mean, Mehman, you're normally in Lahore, aren't you? I mean, is that a city that can deal with this sort of thing well? Oh, I seem to have lost Mehman. Are you there, Mehman? No, I don't know what's happened. She's gone. Maybe the trash workers of LA have come for her. I hope not. Oh gosh. Anyway, we'll move on and hopefully we can get her back in just a moment. But I will just say that one of the issues isn't about all that. It is essentially that, as you said, Vernon, we don't really have a method or mechanism, efficient one anyway, to actually deal with trash. Oh well, maybe we'll come up with one at some point. Let's take our thoughts on to something else entirely, which is to do with investors and really popular and, let's say, successful investors. Not everyone is, of course, but there's one man who is pretty well universally acknowledged as being both the best known and the most revered investor. I'm talking about Warren Buffett. Now, he's moving into his final lap, just a few months before he has to hand over control of his company, and a couple of weeks before he turned 95. Here he is speaking at Berkshire Hathaway's annual meeting back in May, where he announced his retirement.
And there is no question that trade can be an act of war, and I think it's led to bad things. Just the attitudes it's brought out in the United States. I mean, we should be looking to trade with the rest of the world, and we should do what we do best, and they should do what they do best.
Thoughts of Warren Buffett speaking just a few months ago. Well, his net wealth is estimated at $160 billion. He's the fifth richest man in the world, apparently. But the prowess of his company, Berkshire Hathaway, is not what it was. Its shares have underperformed the wider market by one of the biggest margins in decades. So anyway, who is the man known as the Sage of Omaha, and does his buy and hold value-driven strategy of 6 decades still hold? I asked Lawrence Cunningham, he's director of Weinberg Center for Corporate Governance and author of the essays of Warren Buffett, Lessons for Corporate America.
He's a middle-of-the-road, practically minded person that both you just heard him utter makes pretty clear. He's a real salt-of-the-earth, sensible, thoughtful guy who has been a spectacular investor and also a great man.
Yeah, and he comes over, as you say, as being very practical, and right back in the beginning, since his 6 decades he's been doing this. I think if I got the story right, he just kind of looked at the way that investment was and said, I can do it better, but not with any grand strategy, just that kind of buy and hold, really, idea. And it worked.
It worked, yeah. And he focuses on value versus price. That's something a lot of people overlook. He says there's a big difference in many cases for a stock between its value and the price we can buy for it. Sometimes the price is higher than the value. We should avoid that. Sometimes the price is lower, and often very much lower. And he focused, that was his framework. And he focused on those cases where he thought he could buy a stock at a deep price discount from its value, and then hold it for a long time, and eventually the price will catch up to its value. That's been it's not a master stroke, but it was certainly a little different than what used to happen on Wall Street. Well, he taught millions of people that basic fundamental approach, and it's worked for a lot of others too.
Yeah, and lots of people came to sort of sit at his feet, at least metaphorically, and find out how he got it right. But what's interesting, Lawrence, is in recent times it hasn't looked quite so good. I mean, there are various things that he did quite a lot with SoftBank, Japanese investor, didn't go that well. And according to, as I think it's the Financial Times saying that actually he isn't overperforming the wider market, underperforming quite a lot at the moment. So is it just hard for his philosophy now to ride the current stormy world of international commerce?
Well, yeah, there are two things. So one, for Berkshire in particular, this company in particular, it has gotten so big, almost $1 trillion in market cap, not quite, but getting close. So that for him to move that needle requires deploying such huge amounts of capital, tens or hundreds of billions. He just doesn't find those opportunities where the price value discrepancy is so strong anymore for him, for his company. And the second thing is that markets have gotten a lot more efficient in this, so that those opportunities to find deeply discounted prices are scarcer. So when he was first starting out in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of opportunities like that. There were fewer in the 80s and 90s, there are fewer now. So it's a lot harder to practice what he has preached when you're huge the way he is. And it's harder for the rest of us too, just to find those opportunities. I think the basic philosophy still will work. It's just a little harder to find the opportunity.
I mean, I hardly dare ask this because he is a man, obviously, of enormous reputation, but he's 95, or going to be 95. I mean, shouldn't he have left a long while back? Is this a case of someone just hanging on that bit too long, really?
It's a fair question or observation. I think he loves his job. He loves doing this is his life's work. It's his curation. And I think a big part for him, I think if he had stepped back earlier, I think he'd have passed on sooner. So oddly enough, I think it's been healthier for him and for his company for him to stick around. And the reason he's stepped back now, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that his number two, his best friend, partner, Charlie Munger, passed away. Now I guess it's 2 years ago. I think that's taken a lot of the fun out of the sales for him.
Yeah, and just very briefly, is he a man who finds it perhaps hard to to not do it anymore.
Yes, he's I don't know if it's workaholic, but he's passionate, and he thinks investing all the time.
Yeah.
He's always reading, his business reading.
Lawrence Cunningham there talking about the sage of Omaha, Warren Buffett, is going to be 95 at the end of this month. Now, Maymar, let me just check that we've got you back out of the hands of irate Californian bin men. You've come back, which is good. Right, but what about this whole issue about, which we sort of thinking about, someone who clings on that long to a job, he's 95, he's a brilliant man. Is there a point where people just can't give it up and should really, because we should all have to admit when we get older our capacity's less?
Yeah, well, Roger, so there's this, I've seen this personally also in Pakistan. There are some countries where people actually look forward to retiring. So they have retirement plans that, we'll go travel the world, or, we'll focus on our health, or we'll do these activities. Some people write books, all of that, right? So in Pakistan, I've seen people, especially, particularly if you talk about bureaucrats or people who've been in the service or even in journalism, I've seen people, when they retire, they start feeling irrelevant and their social life goes down, even though it's really shouldn't, but it's just in their head that they're used to a lifestyle of working where they get to meet people and all of that, but once they retire they suddenly feel that they are just bound in their houses and they can't really do much, or they're not being invited to those many parties or dinners or whatever. But I think that people have to move fast. I do believe that there's a retirement age and you should probably have a retirement plan, and it should also depend on your health. I mean, you should focus on your health, living a good life after retirement, and do other activities. Like for me, I think when I retire, I'll definitely write a book. That's my practice.
I hope you do. On your experiences, not only in journalism but broadcasting,
of course,
and around the world, all that. Yeah, no, I think there's a fair point. I'm sure it's a long way off, by the way, your retirement.
I'm 45.
No, you're so young. Fabi, let me bring you up. I mean, it's a tendency, I think, in Latin America as well, for people to cling on too long. There's a couple of famous novels, I think, written about elderly generals who won't give up.
Oh yeah, definitely, and I imagine, I mean, especially for people in such powerful positions, such as the case of Buffett, I mean, actually letting go, and as the song from Paul McCartney says, it can be very tricky to reach a point that if you got so much power, you got so many experiences, you can, and a lot of people rely on you. I mean, the amount of workers that are actually part of his company must be massive, and when you reach that point in life, as we were saying before, at some point you gotta decide what's best for you. And I think we were kind of anticipating this happening. I mean, he started getting rid of some of his shares and some of his company, and he was actually starting to feel the Trump effect as well.
The time to go. Well, it's time for us to go, I'm afraid, and we shall gracefully retire from this edition, only this edition of Business Matters. My thanks to Fermin, my thanks to Maymar, and thanks to all of you for listening. We're back tomorrow, rejuvenated. Bye.
This is the BBC World Service, and in the food chain this week. Around 60 million people are living with dementia globally, and there are 10 million new cases every year. I'm Ruth Alexander, and I'm talking to 3 expert guests who've all been exploring the potential for diet to help prevent it. The Food Chain, today at 10:30 and 21:30 GMT. In 30 minutes, the documentary.
It's long been considered a rite of passage for many young New Zealanders to head overseas, but now it seems Kiwis are leaving the country in record numbers. I'm Ruth Evans, and in this BBC World Service documentary, I'll be finding out what's driving this Kiwi exodus.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
It's 1 o'clock GMT. I'm Jackie Leonard. This is the newsroom from the BBC World Service. Donald Trump says there's a good chance he'll meet President Putin of Russia soon to discuss the ceasefire in Ukraine. Mr. Trump also hailed new investment in the US announced by the tech giant Apple.
This is the largest investment Apple has ever made in America and anywhere else.
Thousands of French firefighters are struggling to control the country's biggest wildfire in decades.
Il y a le feu partout et c'est une catastrophe.
There are fires everywhere. It's a disaster, says this firefighter. All the vineyards are burning in the area.
And archaeologists have discovered that the ancient Roman city of Pompeii was reoccupied following its destruction by a volcanic eruption.
People still lived where the city had been and began to live almost like in a kind of camp, a favela, among the ruins of Pompeii.
All here on the newsroom from the BBC in London.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. Donald Trump says there's a good chance that he will meet Russia's President Putin soon to discuss a ceasefire in Ukraine. Earlier on Wednesday, Mr. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff had what was described as a highly productive meeting with Mr. Putin in Moscow. The U.S. deadline for the Kremlin to agree a truce in Ukraine is due to expire on Friday. There's our correspondent in Washington, Gary O'Donoghue.
Despite these positive words today, when I spoke to the president a couple of weeks ago, he told me that Vladimir Putin had four times come to the table, said there's going to be a ceasefire, and then walked away. And he's used some pretty colourful language in the last few weeks to describe Vladimir Putin's actions. So, yes, some positive words today, but a ceasefire, a breakthrough, I wouldn't hold your breath quite yet.
Donald Trump has told reporters that tech giant Apple will invest an additional $100 billion in manufacturing in the U.S. Apple CEO Tim Cook, who was also present in the Oval Office with President Trump. More now from our North America tech correspondent Lily Jamali.
Apple has scrambled to appease President Trump, who earlier this year threatened to place tariffs specifically on Apple products. Mr. Trump has demanded Apple move production of the iPhone from China to the U.S. Instead, Apple has moved it to India, which is now subject to tariffs. Speaking at the Oval Office alongside the U.S. President, Mr. Cook said certain components would be made in the U.S., including the glass that covers new phones and Apple Watches.
State television in Sudan says the Air Force has destroyed an Emirati aircraft carrying Colombian mercenaries as it landed in an area of Darfur controlled by the paramilitary RSF. A military source told the French news agency the plane was completely destroyed at Niala Airport. Mesken Bedesai has this report.
The Sudanese broadcaster said the aircraft were taken off from the Gulf, carrying foreign fighters and military equipment for the Rapid Support Forces, which controls most of Darfur. For a long time, the army led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has accused the UAE of arming the paramilitary forces. Despite numerous reports by the UN, Abu Dhabi has denied any link with the RSF. The conflict, now in its third year, has killed tens of thousands and displaced 13 million people.
Nicaragua has passed a new law declaring all land within 15 kilometers of its borders as state property. A local MP says Nicaraguans living in border towns will not be affected, but critics fear the move will let President Daniel Ortega's government seize homes and farmland and will open the door to more mining. World News from the BBC. Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik says he's not going anywhere, and Bosnia's election authorities stripped him of his presidency. Last week, an appeals court upheld a 12-month jail sentence he had received for obstructing the work of the international envoy overseeing Bosnia's peace accords. Mr. Dodik said he had no intention of leaving the Serb entity and that he'd put his future to a referendum. A woman whose brother died in the Air India crash in June says her family suffered added trauma when they were given the wrong body. Bingal Greenlaw Reid was among the 270 people who died when the Boeing 787 crashed in Ahmedabad shortly after taking off for London. Its sister Arwen spoke to the BBC.
The first casket that arrived in the UK was tested and found to be the remains of two different people, and based on that the coroner made the decision to check everything, and so Finn's was checked against DNA that we'd got off her phones at home, and we found out that was not Finn.
Scientists in Canada have discovered the nature of the starfish to lose their arms and eventually melt their bodies. The disappearance of starfish has led to an increase in the numbers of sea urchins, which then rely on for food. This in turn has killed kelp forests, which sea urchins feed on. That's the latest BBC World News.
Hello, I'm Jackie Leonard, and you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. There's been any number of false dawns for those hoping for an end to the Ukraine war. Now, though, more than 3 years after Russia mounted its full-scale invasion, there's at least a glimmer of hope that a real one might be coming. This was President Trump a few hours ago.
We had some very good talks with President Putin today, and there's a very good chance that we could be ending the round, ending the end of that road. That road was long and continues to be long, but there's a good chance that there will be a meeting very soon.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said Mr. Trump told him about the possible meeting with Vladimir Putin during a telephone call.
European leaders were also on the call. I'm grateful to each of them for their support. We discussed what was said in Moscow. It appears that Russia is now more inclined to consider a ceasefire. Pressure on them is working. But the main thing is to make sure they don't deceive anyone in the details, neither us nor the United States.
The talks have been rolled out on Wednesday morning in Moscow with President Putin and University Director. Over in Russia, editor Steve Rosenberg.
Donald Trump did something which had been threatening to do to hurt the Russian economy. He imposed an additional 25% tariff on goods from India because India buys Russian oil. This was one of the measures he'd been threatening to take to try to hurt the Russian economy, to target Russia's waters. And he did that today in relation to India. And as well as that, the White House later said that although the talks have gone well, Washington is still planning to go ahead with secondary sanctions against countries that buy Russia. So you have a very contradictory picture at the moment.
These latest tariffs are due to come into effect at the end of the month.